You're listening to an MDS podcast. In this episode, Matt and I talk about the do's and don'ts of worship ministry, and we kind of share some faux pas, that you might call them, that we had in the past, some mistakes we might have made before, all this and so much more. You're listening to the Sunday Setlist. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sunday Setlist. Matt, we are already on episode 3 altogether. Did you ever think we'd make it there?
No.
I didn't think we'd make it to 2, to be honest. So
yeah,
we're just exceeding my expectations so far. But what are we talking about today, Matt?
Today we are going to tackle some good rehearsal strategies, talk about some do's and don'ts, and what mistakes that we've both made along the way.
Mistakes. I don't think no, there's about 1,000 mistakes I can think of that I've made with rehearsal. Do you remember, before we go into any of our strategies, do you remember being in rehearsal before being a worship leader?
Like as a volunteer?
Yes, as a volunteer, before you were running rehearsal.
Yes, and actually, in the last couple of years, before I've been restored to ministry, I've just been volunteering on piano or on the praise team. So I've gotten to be just sitting and playing through rehearsals again, even after leading them. So
do you think that's helped you as you are back into the ministry, since it's a more recent memory? Because, I have to be honest, when I think about, especially my first few years of worship ministry, I couldn't remember when I was in rehearsals, and I kind of forgot about that. And had I remembered that, I probably would have made as many mistakes as I did.
Oh yeah, it's kind of crazy how soon you forget that just a short while ago you were one of the volunteers that you're getting frustrated at.
Yeah.
Well,
let's yeah, and I think we're about to jump right into it, but I think that's the number one thing that I had to remember and struggled with, was that big word that they're volunteers. The fact that we're dealing with volunteers. We might be getting paid or not paid, but we might be. It's obvious that we want to be there, because when you have that title of worship leader,
right? It's our call. It's our burden to shepherd these people who are volunteering their time and talents.
And I even struggle with that as a teacher. I'm paid to be a choir teacher, so I'm paid to think about the choir so much. It's always on the back of my mind. But then I forget, when I'm dealing with these middle schoolers, sometimes I forget, like, hey, wait a second, this isn't their number one thing. They've got their own things. Their thing might be volleyball or something like that, or they've got 5 other classes to worry about. And so I think that's just a general rule for anything, honestly. When you're dealing with volunteers or dealing with people who, yes, they signed up for something, but to remember that they probably don't have the same level of concern about it. Although that sounds kind of bad, but it's probably not as high as what yours is.
Right. Like they like to do it, but it's not their chosen career.
Right.
So
let's jump right into it. We got to-dos and not to-dos, and I think what everybody's wanting to know is, what are the not to-dos? What are some things not to do? Maybe some things that we've done before that is just a big old no-no.
So I remember when I first started leading worship, when I was the interim in high school. It was, like I said, it was amazing how fast I had forgotten that I was, just two weeks ago, I was the volunteer who was struggling to get, to understand what the leader was saying sometimes, or struggling to produce what the leader wanted. and I took it way too seriously as
Yeah.
a leader. Now, part of that is being 17 and being, feeling pressure to be perfect and not really understanding the goal that we had. Um, but I would say my first big not to do is um, having expectations of perfection.
And
Um,
when you talk about that, you mean like especially from the music side of that
oh
everything's got
yes,
to be perfect.
yes. Well, because this I believe blankets all of worship ministry, and another big thing that I have come to learn is that um, music is a form of worship, but worship is not solely music. And so,
Mm.
our job as worship leaders, the music is a big part of it and should be done well and should be prioritized. But the music is not the job. The job is the people.
That should be put on a pillow or something. That's perfect. Music is not the job. The job is the people. That's yeah.
Yes. Or I
That
should
that
say the music
that's
is not the first job. The first job is the people. The music comes second.
yeah. Which is hard. That's so hard for us. And I really do mean like speaking of you and I is the fact that we went to school for music. I mean that's
Right.
the thing that we were so our mind we were so invested in that and of knowing the music theory and all that stuff. So it's hard for us to go into a situation like this and not want to want to go so in depth music wise and to
Right.
worry about every little thing because that's what we were programmed to do.
Right. And don't get me wrong. I think I think anybody listening to this podcast can agree that it is incredibly difficult, almost impossible to worship to bad music.
Oh yes, there's a fine line between and an obvious line between caring too much and being nitpicky too much, but then also just not caring and letting things go.
Right. Right. And so like this is our when we prepare a worship service, this is our sacrifice. This is supposed to be our spotless lamb. But that doesn't mean that we are to prepare perfection. We are just to prepare the best that we can for that given Sunday.
So when you're dealing with someone, because you know, God bless them, we've had people in the. I'm sure you've had people in the past, and I have too, where they wanna sing, they want to be a part of it, or they want to do that solo and stuff like that. What are some things that you're doing to help guide them when maybe they're just not hitting the mark there?
Hitting the mark musically or
Yes, musically, because we're still along those lines of you're saying, okay, we can't focus everything onto how we can't make the music as extremely perfect, but when we're in that line of okay, this is not sounding good, like what are some things that you're doing to help that situation?
well, there are and as a junior high choir teacher, I know that you know how to place people in your choir. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? You know who to sit them next to, um, how far away from the microphones to place them, or
Yes.
so what it boils down to is knowing your volunteers, knowing more than just their musical ability, knowing them as people. And so, for instance, um, my my father-in-law is a very he the only time I ever see him nervous is when he's singing a solo. But he's gotten much better. So we started 10 years ago. We started having duets with people, and then he grew in confidence and his ability to retain pitch got better. So you have to know where people are at and nicely and lovingly address that with them. because there are some people who are going to think that I had one person who um, uh, the Cowardly Lion comes to mind,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure at one point he had a lovely voice, and if he didn't have a vibrato he could drive a truck through, he would still have a lovely voice.
Yeah.
But those people are the ones that, okay, you choose a certain type of song for them. Every once in a while you have to know them intimately, know their voice, know their limits, and also be able to speak candidly with them about their limits and their strengths in a
See,
way that's
and I think that stems from your whole thing of knowing your team. And I think that's perfect to go what you said there, because one, if you know your team, you know you're not gonna put someone in that spot where they're going to be exposed like that. You're not going to give that person that is super, super off pitch and has a hard time finding the pitch by themselves. You're not going to give them that long solo that happens at the beginning of a song or something like that.
right.
And with the other thing too, I love how you bring up that whole thing of vibrato and stuff like that. It's no secret that in a lot of a lot of older singers, that vibrato becomes a thing, which is fine and it works for some songs. But I think
Right.
that's perfect too of what you said, because there's going to be some songs too that you're not going to place that person in, but you're going to find songs for them, and that's better than just saying we don't have a spot for you anymore. And that's
Yes.
the thing that I see way too much, is that you have these people who have been in worship ministry for a long time, and they feel like there's just not a spot for them anymore. And I think that's one of our jobs, is to find where to place them. And I don't think there's an age limit on worship ministry, and that's
Exactly.
just part of knowing your team.
Well, so when we get to heaven, it is going to be all generations worshiping together. And our job as worship leaders is to bring our flock to the throne room of God together. So if the throne room of God is going to be all generations worshiping together, then our worship ministries need to be comprised of all generations and reaching all generations. Which that's a whole other thing that we'll have another
Yeah.
guest talk about. But making sure that people know there is a place for them, and knowing them well enough to say, okay, I'm not going to give you this contemporary solo, but I have a great spiritual coming up that I think I'd love to take for you to take a look at it and let me know what you think. Or knowing, can they sing with the track, or can they sing well with others? Would somebody else singing a harmony with them help them to sing better on pitch? It
Yes.
just comes down to knowing your people, being involved in the church that you're working at.
Yes.
Um,
All right. So another to do slash not to do that I found out over time, and it took me a long time, and you were sadly a victim of this, Matt, and I apologize to this day. But I learned that it doesn't have to be so complex. The service doesn't have to be as complex as I was making it. So as an example, when I first, and this is really even before the days of when I was full-time worship leading, but when I was kind of filling in at a church here, doing a conference here, something like that, I would be so detailed in every single song. So say that you and I are doing a service together, I'd be like, okay, Matt, you're going to lead this verse, but then I'm going to take this verse, and then halfway through we're going to harmonize. You're going to take this part and da 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 da, and it all be on the paper, and then also
medleys.
on yeah, and on top of that too, I would say, okay, Matt, you're going to play piano on this song, then I'm going to play piano on this song, and all
Yeah.
this stuff. And it was partly because I was excited. I was excited to worship lead, and I had the time, and it was different from doing it on a week to week to week to week basis. It was the whole thing of, oh, this is the first time in 5 weeks that I'm worship leading. So I'm going to pour all of this into it. And got to the place where it got to be too complex. You bring that into rehearsal, and then your rehearsal becomes about the whole complexity of that.
Mm,
And you kind of miss the mark of the rest of rehearsal, because you're still trying to figure out, okay, am I playing piano on the song? Am I leading? Am I singing this word or not? And it becomes too much.
Yeah, which I don't think is inherently a bad thing.
No.
Because we want to bring fresh ideas, we want to bring complexities sometimes, but I think the challenge becomes making simplifying, or how do I want to say this, um, doing simple complexities.
Yes.
So your new fresh ideas, but making sure that they're executed in a way that that your volunteers will understand, and that's not distracting.
Well, and honestly, too, if I think back to those times, I treated it more. My gift, I believe that I have, and the thing that I love doing is planning concerts. And I think I was taking too much of that into the Sunday service. And
Oh,
the thing that I've learned too is that the easiest time, and you may disagree with this, but I think the easiest time, especially now that I'm seeing it from a congregation perspective, I'm not leading each Sunday. The easiest time to sing and worship with the team on stage, for me at least, has been when everybody's singing. And I still think it's important that you have those moments where you have the one person start the song and lead it, especially if you're doing a new song and stuff like that. I think that is absolutely important. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. But I'm saying when you make things complex like I did, and you've got one person singing this, but then you got another person singing this, well then I feel like you're starting to diminish the whole point of, well, we're supposed to be singing this together. We're supposed to be worshiping
yeah.
together. And it became too much of a show rather than a time of worship. I feel like.
And how many of us worship leaders can honestly say that we didn't make it about ourselves at a given point in time? As
Yeah,
wrong as it is, we're human and we're musicians.
yeah, and
And so,
I'll tell you that's something that I prayed the most while I was a worship leader. There's someone that we went to college with. I remember talking to him freshman year. He had an opportunity to be a worship leader about 3 different times at that point. He was a sophomore at the time or whatever. And I said, okay, so why didn't you take that opportunity? And he said, because I knew that if I took that opportunity, then I'd want it to just glorify myself, and that's not what the whole point of it is.
mhm.
And so that's definitely a thing to
Well,
worry
part of
about.
it, part of it can't even be avoided, unfortunately. The way most churches do it now is even an associate and a worship pastor will have to candidate in most cases, where they come and do an audition
Yeah,
for the church. And you want to only glorify God. Like, our goal should be to glorify God but edify each other. We don't want to glorify each other. But in a candidating service, it's it is an audition. And
yeah,
so it's so hard to be able to truly glorify God, but also glorify God with a song that makes my voice sound really good,
yeah.
or shows off my skill on the piano, or my skill in putting a worship service together. I hope they catch this scripture reference tying these two songs together. It's so difficult, and so many times it's just the nature of what it has become kind of shoots us in the foot before we even get started. It's just something that we
Absolutely.
have to be incredibly aware of.
Absolutely. And so taking it back to rehearsal, I think that leads to another thing of, and actually combining the last two things we've said is, um, just a few minutes ago said that we need to find a spot for them and all that stuff, and then also that things don't need to be all about us. When you think of the rehearsal, I mean that is the time for the worship ministry to be together. That is the time for the worship ministry to have their time, to have their spot. And honestly, I always saw rehearsal as just another time of worship. If there's something that I miss the most of being a worship leader, just a couple months out of it, is that rehearsal, because it was such an intimate time of worship. I finished my time as worship leader with I used to do where they were all on mics and all that stuff. I had a smaller team, so I got to the place where everybody was gathered around the piano, and we were all singing, worshiping, and just some powerful moments there. But I think something to do with rehearsal is to make it that space, to make it that time, and something I know I that you learned from someone else, but that I saw you do, and I don't know if you still do it to this time, but I loved was when someone new would come in, you would light a candle and stuff like that. Do you still have things that you do that's kind of like a special time for the worship ministry during your rehearsals?
Um, uh, yeah. So I try to keep it fresh with when new people come. And I've tried lighting the candle. I learned that from a ministry mentor in Anderson, and people liked it when he did it. It didn't necessarily work out for my crowd, but that was something. It just taught me to try new things to make people feel welcome.
Yeah.
And is we tried a whole slew of different things. Um, right now, I think my favorite thing to do with people who might slip up and tell me that they play an instrument, um, or or something, or may passively be interested in playing in the band or singing in the vocal team, is I'll just invite them to a rehearsal. And there was one time in my church in North Carolina, there was a guy who played harmonica. I had no idea the man's skill on harmonica. No idea. But I thought, okay, well, if he's good, that could be flipping sweet. So I invited him to a rehearsal. Sweetest guy. And he shows up with a whole belt holster
Oh
of
my
like
goodness.
7 different keyed harmonicas.
Yeah, because you got to change them out
Oh,
per
yeah.
per key, which is just insane to me. You've
Yeah.
got
This
your
guy,
D sharp harmonica.
yeah, this guy was like Carl Erskine harmonica. Okay. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. He takes it seriously. He might be pretty good. And so I gave him some chord charts and said, why don't, if you're feeling it, just try something, and if not, if you just want to sit and listen, that's fine. But if you want to jam with us, go ahead. And we're playing, I forget what song it was, but suddenly there was this angelic harmonica line just
Mm.
soaring over everything else, like Fred Betterhead from the Country Bears, like beautiful. And uh, it was so much fun. Um, I figured you'd like that reference, but it was just so much fun. So I like having new people come and jam with us, whatever their skill level is. It's also kind of a sneaky way of auditioning them.
Well, that's beautiful. That's like a no pressure situation audition. I feel like that's so hard, and I've gone back and forth of doing the whole audition thing. That could be a whole nother episode. But I hate the pressure that there is behind the audition. People get themselves freaked out to the place where they have a bad audition or they don't even show up, and I'm like, oh man, I wish
Yeah,
I just wish they would know that I want you to succeed. I'm not here hoping that you're going to fail. I want you to succeed. And
right.
that's such a great way to have a no pressure situation. Hey, just jam out with us. Come
Yeah,
come see what we're about. It's almost like we're telling them to audition us
right.
instead of us auditioning them.
And
That's nice.
as kind of going back to what you said about rehearsals being a special time, um, you're right in that is the band and praise team's opportunity for you to minister to them
Mm-hmm.
because the rest of the congregation isn't there. So your job in a rehearsal is not just to hone the songs and everything and the skill and to practice, but your job is to minister to your volunteers at your rehearsal. Because on Sunday morning, they are ministering to the congregation. You know what I mean? Um,
Absolutely.
so it's just come to your rehearsal with no expectations of perfection and just to jam with your friends.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that you have to be best friends with everybody, but you have to care for your people, you have to be friendly, and you're just there to have fun. People worship so much more easily and so much more vulnerably when they're having fun and when they can see that you are enjoying it and that you're having fun.
You're going to have a hard time as a congregation member worshiping with a bunch of people who look concerned, look scared, or look like, man, I'm just trying to follow the music,
Yes.
rather than just having time. When you're jamming out up there with all of those people, it just invites more people into that time,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
So
I
that's great.
agree.
I miss it. I miss the whole rehearsal. I miss just trying things especially with the band and having a band and all that stuff. That part I do miss. I will always admit to that. I miss that part, and I knew I would. So that's a great time. I also having it be a special time. Some teams are going to have things that matter to them. Some teams are going to have some things that they used to do in rehearsal maybe before you were there that you did with them that matter to them. I know there's always been a question of should there be a prayer time during rehearsal, and I mean, obviously I would say yes,
Yes.
some type of prayer time needs to be a part of rehearsal. But I one of the teams that I've worked with, they wanted to have that time at the end to share prayer requests and stuff like that. And when I first got there, I was like, I want to focus more on this and this and this. And I want to spend the time at the end because they would stay after and do the prayer requests and stuff. And I was like, man, I don't want to waste the time doing that, and so I tried like, well, just email me the prayer requests, and that,
Mm,
yeah, they didn't really latch on that, but it was a powerful time for them to be there and to share their prayer requests, and all of us pray over that, and really made us feel like a team, like a family. And that was something I had to learn as well. I tried to take that away, but really that was a big part of why they were there too, because it's
yeah.
in that situation, they were choosing to do that instead of a different Sunday school, or instead of a different class or something like that, or
Right.
instead of just being home on a Wednesday night.
Right. Because the truth of the matter is, apart from Christ, we can do nothing.
Yeah.
Um, and that's so hard for young or new worship leaders to learn. Again, it's the notion of caring more about where your people are spiritually than where they are musically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but that is so hard to learn. And it's hard because that's something that you have to prioritize in your rehearsal. So leading into my next do's and don'ts is to not make your rehearsal too long
Mm-hmm.
because you're dealing with volunteers. I realize not every church is able to have a midweek rehearsal. If you can, do a midweek rehearsal. That way, Sunday morning, it's just a run through or start and stop, warm up and go. Um, because if you make your rehearsals too long, you have to remember you're dealing with volunteers, and they're giving up their time away from their families um, to contribute to your ministry. Um, and so you just have to be respectful uh, of that. But so for instance, I keep my rehearsals to an hour, if at all possible. I never go past an hour and 15. Um,
Which is good time. I think that's a
yeah.
good amount of time.
Right, because if you can run your rehearsals right, even teaching new songs shouldn't take that long.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So even in an hour rehearsal, I make time at the very end to pray with my team because I know that if I don't prioritize the time, I'll forget about it. And so, uh,
And that doesn't have to be at the end. I mean, that can be at the
no, you're
beginning,
fine.
and also the whole prayer request thing doesn't have to be. That's not a you have to do kind of thing.
No, no,
It's
no.
it's whatever. Again, it goes back to your whole thing of knowing your team,
Mhm.
knowing the ministry that you're in. It's what works for your team to be a
Right.
team.
Right. But prioritize prayer in your rehearsals and keep your rehearsals short.
And I think that goes along too with you need to organize your rehearsals. You need
Yes.
to know what you're doing before you get into it. One of my worst rehearsals was for one of um for a big service that I had. And again, Matt, you're a victim of this. We did the whole um no, what was it? The one where we all worship together as a church, the global hymn sing.
Him saying.
Uh, and this is about a month into me being a worship leader full time. And we had a whole bunch of extra musicians, including Matt there, and singers and stuff like that. And we're trying to coordinate a whole lot of stuff. And in that situation, it was not possible for us to do a midweek rehearsal, mainly because I lived out of town. So that would have meant driving an hour and a half twice a week, which just was not feasible. So we had a rehearsal. Um, it gets started late due to, of course, something technical always has to go wrong. That's a whole nother thing in itself too. But then I remember, so rehearsal is supposed to start at 9. We get started maybe 9:15 or something like that. But then I remember, service starts at 10:30, so I would try and make sure that rehearsal was out by 10. Well, 10:10 comes along, 10:15 comes along, 10:20 comes along, and at that point, I recognize there are two songs we have yet to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to make the decision then and there of we need to cut these songs. One, I overplanned the service, but it was supposed to be more of a music filled service. That's a whole other thing. But um, two, it was just like, man, had I organized that rehearsal a little bit better, had I maybe prepared more, although I felt like I prepared all that I could have. But had I been more organized of how we went about the actual rehearsal, not been so picky about some other things, um, maybe that wouldn't have happened. That I even though it was a larger service, I still felt like that could have been done in an hour. And so that was a big learning moment for me.
Yeah. And it was a good service.
Yeah.
It was a good service. Um, so uh, with the whole being organized thing, it's imperative to clearly communicate what you're asking your volunteers for. Um, and so sometimes it happens where you get an idea on the fly and you can't quite say in the right words what you're asking for, and that's okay. But to make that the habit of how you run your rehearsals, all you're going to do is irritate your volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
So I always say I don't want to sound like the recording. I want to sound like us. But I know from my preparation, because it's my job, I know what I want, where I want the drums to come in on this song, where I want the vocalist to come in, where I want harmonies, how much drums I want, the drum pattern that I want where. You know what I'm saying? And that
Yeah.
way, especially if it's a new song, that way your volunteers come in and you can say, okay, here is the parameters, here are the guidelines. Within those guidelines, go nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Be yourself. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it's okay. We'll figure out something that works. But I can clearly say that this is where I want you to come in. And this is kind of the feel that I want you to come in on.
And
It's
you planned that out before, like this going into rehearsal.
generally
See, I've
where,
been in rehearsals before where people are having to pull up the song, listen to the song again. I think that's one of the things where for that really makes you an even better leader is if you have prepared, you have rehearsed yourself, or at least you have prepared enough to know what you want going into that rehearsal.
right. And that's a teacher mindset. That's something that was beat into you and I in
Yeah.
college.
Yeah.
But it's very applicable. If for instance, sometimes my drummer needs to say, "Hey, Matthew, I just need a second. I'm going to listen to it real quick because he's like me and he has a hard time improvising if he doesn't have something to go off of."
Yeah.
But I know that, and I know that I have that same personality trait. So it's like, okay, we can take a minute or so. You can regroup and things like that. But generally, knowing what you want and being able to clearly communicate it will save so much effort. Um,
Yeah, I think that's again, I think that's fine, especially because that drummer is volunteering for you and all that stuff. But I do think again, we go along the lines of we don't want to waste people's time. You don't
exactly.
want to waste people's time during rehearsal. The last thing that I ever wanted someone to be doing during rehearsal is just sitting there. And sadly, I can look back at especially some of my early rehearsals, and it's filled with, especially at the beginning, people just sitting there waiting to rehearse. They have people have taken time, whether it's on the Sunday morning, they've still taken time out of their Sunday morning to get up earlier, to get the kids ready, or to do whatever, so that they can be there and be present during the hour that you scoped out. And so if they have already said, "Hey, I've made that commitment to be there and to be at your utilization," then we have to make the most of their time. We can't just have people sitting there. We can't just have people waiting on us, especially if there's something that we could have done to prepare for that.
Right. Um,
But with that thing too, something I learned too on the other side of that is it's okay to have some expectations
yes.
for people volunteering. And I learned this especially with the praise team. Some of my more frustrating rehearsals would be that we back in the day we would have a Wednesday night rehearsal, then we'd do a quick Sunday morning rehearsal in between services. So I do the Wednesday night rehearsal, be teaching a new song and all that stuff, and I'd go, I planned out to go, part by part, bit by bit, so that they learned the song, got under their belt, all that stuff. And then we show up on Sunday, and those people don't even come to rehearsal because they didn't work on the song. I learned later on it's okay to, especially if you're on top of it with planning center or whatever you're using to plan, of being like, hey, I've sent this song out to you guys. Or even to send out a new song,
Mhm.
even a month in advance, or whatever, but to be
Yep.
like, hey, be listening to this, be listening to this, maybe practice along with this over time and stuff like that. Don't do anything crazy. You don't need to spend every waking second learning the song, but at least listen. I would always tell people at least listen to it once or twice before next Sunday. And when I start having that expectation, things change quickly, but it's not asking too much either. You can go overboard on that. But if you're saying at least listen to the song before Sunday, I think that's okay. I think that's okay. And that's part of, again, not wasting people's time. Because you'll have people who did listen to the song, all that stuff. But then if you don't set that expectation, you'll have other people who just show up because I mean, that's just the expectation they think there is that, okay, I'm going to show up and I'm going to learn the song brand new, cold right there and then. But if you set that expectation, then people know, then, oh, okay, I'll listen to it, before, and then you've got an even more effective rehearsal.
Yes. And there are many who would disagree with us on this and potentially call us too stringent. And
Uh-huh.
sometimes we can probably be too stringent. Um, but there is nothing wrong with having expectations of your volunteers, especially the big one is to show up to rehearsal on time.
Yes. Yeah.
The midweek rehearsal, to be fair, doesn't have quite the same amount of pressure to start on time. But Sunday morning, if I say we're starting rehearsal at 7:45, I'm rehearsing with or without you at 7:45.
That is a big thing that I learned, was to start the rehearsal then.
Yeah.
Because when you wait on the team, and I've started rehearsals by myself, but when you wait on the team to get there, and it's past time, then you'll be waiting on the team even longer the next week, is what I've learned.
Yes.
And so if you
Because
start rehearsal at that time, they're gonna remember that, and they're gonna start showing up on time.
especially if you are inheriting a ministry that has done that the same way for hundreds of years, it can be really difficult. But you have to remember that the habit that they've gotten into starting rehearsal at that time or being allowed to be late and it's no biggie, that's a habit that was learned. So by you being strict about when you are starting rehearsal. It may hurt feelings, it may make people mad, but we're not necessarily in the business of saving people's feelings. You
And
will,
that's not even the thing that I've encountered a lot of hurt feelings from. I can remember what, like I told you, the midweek rehearsal would happen during the same time as a kids uh, weekly service or whatever. There'd be an adult Bible study happening down the hall as well.
yeah,
Sometimes there'd be a meal before or something like that. It was also the time too where a lot of people before these things would happen would come and grab a cup of coffee, which it's too late for me, but grab a cup of coffee, chat up with one another, catch up, because they haven't seen each other since Sunday and all that stuff. So there'd be a lot going on in the building, and something that would frustrate me, but then I finally just learned, okay, just start the rehearsal, is that those people would be in the kitchen still talking, or they'd be down the hall trying to talk to somebody else, and all that stuff. And then what I originally did was I'd go down and I'd be like, have you seen so and so? And then I'd go and I'd find that person in one room, then I'd have to go and find another person in another room, come back to sanctuary, another person's left, so I'd have to go and find that person. So when I stopped doing that and started doing rehearsal, the first couple of weeks, it wasn't an anger that I got from it. They were just like, "Oh, I thought you'd come get me." When you start the rehearsal, you're telling them, "I'm not going to come get you at this point.
right,
You know that rehearsal starts at 6 p.m. or whatever, and this is just my expectation going forward."
right, exactly. It's letting them know what your expectations are, and eventually it will become a learned habit to show up on time. Obviously, extending grace where grace needs to be extended. You know what I
Yes,
mean?
yes, that was on my actual not to do list. Um, is one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made was, and it's happened twice in two different places, was I would get upset about, sometimes it would stem from people being late to rehearsal or whatever, or not showing up, or being upset about this or that. And usually it was rehearsal related, because I always felt like, well, that's our time. And really in my head was probably thinking, that's my time and you're disrespecting me,
Yeah.
is how I used to see it. But I would end up sending an email out to the team, and this is probably the biggest time where I've lost people before, and it's sad because I could have gone about it a different way, but I've sent out an email, obviously nothing horrendous or anything like that, but just being, showing obviously that I was very upset about things, and that this should happen, all that stuff. I remember one of the times I did that, someone just said, well, this is actually what I was dealing with. And they actually came and talked to me and they said, this is what I was dealing with before. I'm sorry that I've been late all these times. But they, I'd really hurt them by not taking the time to get to know them, as you said, but
Mhm.
also not extending grace, and that would have been an opportunity to do that. And
I've done that.
sadly, I lost some people.
I've done that as well, and that is hard to get them back.
You've
Um,
yeah, I was gonna say that, but you've got a history of doing that. Of being on a, weren't you on a probation one time?
oh, that was stupid.
Yeah.
That was just flat out dumb. Um, it,
I just love, I just, my favorite phone calls from you would be when you'd send out an email, and somebody would be upset about it or something like that, and honestly, a lot of times it's making you look bad, but a lot of times, I mean, you were just sending out emails because it was part of your thing, but it just would crack me up because it was one of the times that you would call me and be like, Isaac, can you believe this happened?
yeah. So part of knowing the people that you're ministering to is knowing how fragile they can be.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm, but let's face it, sometimes you can't. There are always a better way to. There's always a better way to come about it. But just like kids, um, you know, adults and volunteers, they need to know what your expectations are.
All right, Matt. So someone comes in to Sunday morning rehearsal and I'm going to pick Sunday morning because it's early, and so let's say you've got someone that keeps coming in late. Let's say you've got maybe a young adult teenager keeps coming in late to Sunday morning rehearsal. Um, what do you do at that point? Do you number one, do you allow them to still participate that Sunday? And two, how do you confront the situation?
So the first question, yes, because they came to rehearsal, and they're willing to serve, and especially if it's a young person, I don't squelch their willingness to serve. Um, but that is a conversation to be held in private with that person.
Yeah.
We have all made the mistake of confronting the situation when it happens,
Mm-hmm.
and we just can't do that.
Or
Um,
being passive aggressive, which does not
yes.
help anything either.
So finish your rehearsal, do the service, and then Monday send a text or a phone call to that person and just say, "Hey, can you call me, or can we meet in person?" And just talk about it, and then ask before assuming. Ask. I've noticed you've been coming in to late to rehearsals pretty regularly. Is there something I can, is there a way I can help you get there on time, or is there something that's going on that's causing it? Always from a lens of how can I help you?
Yeah.
And that's that goes also with feedback. If it's helpful feedback, if somebody has a complaint or something, it's like, okay, well, how can I help you accommodate that? Never putting the blame on that person, and certainly never confronting the situation in front of people. Um,
Yeah.
just like a kid in choir practice, people mess up. I mess up plenty. Um, and so, but that along with knowing your team is allowing them to get to know you. And so when they know your flaws, it makes it easier to be vulnerable and to be truthful of, this is what I have going on, and things like that.
Well, and also knowing your team too is knowing how are you going to get that across? Because I will tell you that um, I'm guilty of this. When I was in high school, I was on a worship team and had some fantastic worship leaders. Kept coming in late on a Sunday, and I would sleep in or something like that. Or there are also times too. I was I had my first job at the time too, where I would forget to tell them that I was scheduled to work that Sunday. So then they're like, okay, where are you, and all that stuff. And they gave so much grace and would send me texts, would call me, I even got some notes from them at one point too, but or would pull me aside and just be like, hey, you either gotta let us know you're not going to be here, or so you gotta, you gotta let us know, or you gotta start coming on time and stuff like that. And finally, something that really stuck with me, and they knew though that I would learn from it, was that yes, I came in. Um, I mean, and it was pretty late. I came in probably 20 minutes late to rehearsal, and I usually would wait for them to be like, all right, come on and join us, Isaac. But this time I sat there in the pew kind of awkwardly with my bass guitar, and they never had me come back up, and they actually had filled my spot for bass guitar. And then they again, with a lot of grace, with a lot of love, pulled me aside, well, called me the next Monday and said, hey, we're sorry that we had to fill your spot, but again, you're 20 minutes late. We really need you to be here. We want to have you here, and that was, they knew me, and they knew they could be that direct with me, and they knew that that was probably going to be one of the only ways that I would actually straighten up and do as I was told. But that's also part of knowing your team. And again, love and grace was how that was created.
Yeah.
It was never a whole situation of talking about your title or anything like that, of being, well, I'm your boss, never that kind of thing. It was that kind of thing of, we want to partner with you, we want to have you here. And I think that's an important job for us as worship leaders.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
man, we could go forever with all
Mm.
these
I
worship.
have
Did you have
just
it?
one, I just have one more,
Super.
uh, which I tried to save till close to the last. Um, and it is something that I have learned from so much trial and error. It's kind of the culmination of all of this. Is that as musicians, we are so prone to comparison. Um, we will compare ourselves week by week on success and whatever success means to us. Um, so learn not to quantify engagement by from your congregation, because one week they may be completely engaged, every hand in the air, and the
Mm-hmm.
next week they may be completely engaged, every arm crossed.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it looks and sounds different doesn't mean that they're not engaged.
And you don't
So,
know where they're at in their journey at that point in time.
yes. And so the same thing goes for our rehearsals. And one week we may have a stellar rehearsal, and the next week it may be just okay. Learn to be okay with just the okay rehearsals, because we are dealing, again, broken record, we're dealing with volunteers, and those volunteers are our job. The most detrimental thing we can do is to keep pushing them and pushing them and pushing them and pushing them to get up to a certain standard,
Yeah.
or to get to where we were last week, because you don't know what's going on in your drummer's head one Wednesday night versus the next, or your bass player. You don't know what they've got going on right now. They could just be tired. It's especially if it's a midweek rehearsal, you're rehearsing, 7 to 8, 9 o'clock. It's late in the day, everybody's worked. You don't know what they've got going on. But if it's just okay, and you know that you're confident Sunday morning is it's going to be just fine, leave it at just fine. The moment that we keep pushing for spectacular, we've taken God completely out of the picture and placed ourselves there. And all we will do is push our volunteers to a breaking point, to where they're mad, and it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
No one should leave a rehearsal frustrated.
No.
You know, we're left with such an important thing as worship leaders, is the fact that people have joined the ministry, have joined the team to use the gifts and talents that God has given them to glorify him. And the last thing that you want to have them think of when they're doing that is frustration, is anger, is that stuff. They shouldn't equate those things with that. And if they are doing that, the thing is, most likely we're the cause of that. And that's
Yes.
something that we are interested with, and that we need to make sure is not happening. I can remember we did we were doing a couple years ago choir around Christmas time, and I was pushing them. I was pushing them because I had rehearsals were ticking down and all this stuff, and they'd done some choir specials in the past and stuff like that. But I was just like, we gotta get this sounding good. And I remember we had our dress rehearsal or whatever before, and I really pushed them during that. And then we get to the actual service, and after the service, like half of them came up to me and were just like, "Was that okay? Was that okay?" And I was like, "What do you think?" And they're like, "I don't know. I was just worried about this and this." I was like, "Didn't you have a great time doing this?" Well, I was worried about this and this, and it's just like, man, I feel like as a leader, I really missed the mark of being like, your job now is just to go and sing. Yes, we can have expectations. Yes, we can work people during rehearsal, but also we got to remember to allow them to not just be so anxious about what they're doing.
Yeah. Allow them to try new things in rehearsal. And if a new thing that they've tried doesn't work, don't tell them it didn't work, because they're musicians just like you. They know 9 out of 10 times. Um, my drummer currently love him dearly. He plays so passionately, and he'll never play the same thing twice, and I love that about him. But I also love how humble he is, in that if a fill that he tried in rehearsal, just he really just messed it up or it doesn't fit, he won't try it again. Or when we get done, he'll say it before I do, like, I don't think I'm going to do that again. I don't think it fit. Um,
You
so
know where
allow,
that stems from too, though, right? That stems from you as well as the leader being able to own up to your mistakes as well too. I mean,
yeah,
I there are multiple times where I'd play the opening of something on the piano. I'd be like, well, that was an oopsies. Let's try it again. Or
yeah,
I never, as the leader myself, as the trained musician in the room, I never let myself be too serious, too taken too seriously on those things, And once I started doing that, other people, yeah, would same thing would be willing to try and make a mistake, try and make a, as I say in my class, or make a bold mistake.
yeah, yeah. Just it all comes down to the reason we do what we do is to care for people. And so your rehearsal should never ever be a tense thing. I've sat there in rehearsals for uh, for for a few different people where even I, as a worship leader, I get frustrated because why are you talking to them that way? Why are we focusing so hard on this? It sounds fine.
Yeah.
And there was one time that I, as a worship leader, I could not tell. Again, my drummer, I sorry, everything comes back to him, but I love him. um I could
He's
not
good.
tell.
I've heard him on
uh,
your guys' streams. He's good.
he's fabulous. But I could not clearly communicate what the heck I was trying to say. I had the idea in my head, but I could not make the words come out. And so, like, we tried different things 3 or 4 times in rehearsal. And so finally I was like, you know what? Let's sleep on it. Let's pray about it. Sunday morning, because he had a way that he's used to doing it. And I said, okay, let's take that and do something more. The way we had been doing it is just fine. But I was like, okay, can we spice this up a little bit? And so I said, pray about it. I'll think about it more. And then Sunday morning we came and we were both like, yeah, I still have no idea what I was trying to say. So let's just do it the way we've been doing it. And
Yeah.
you have to be willing to say that. Again, not expecting perfection. Don't worry about sounding like somebody else. Worry about sounding like yourselves. Create your group's unique sound, and care more about where people are spiritually than musically.
But you say, let's try something different. Let's try something more too. That's making rehearsal fun. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
these people, especially when you think of the band, they're musicians. Like they're wanting to come and make music. And I'll tell you, as someone who's been on praise bands and stuff like that, especially if I'm playing keys and I'm the synthesizer, it can get boring sometimes. It can get, I mean, when it's like, all right, playing this F key again, going to C, and then when the worship leader is like, well, let's try to have some fun with this. That's not saying too much. I mean, as long as you're doing that at special times, some of that, that's not asking for too much. That's just trying to have fun, to jam out, and to create something. And people are there to create. People are there to jam out. People are there to make music, and that allows the rehearsal to be fun. That allows what they're doing, what they're giving their time up to do, to be fun.
yep.
So,
We
man,
could go on for hours about rehearsals, but
we could,
this,
and so we might do another one later on of
yeah,
because I'm sure there's so many more in the chamber of some faux pas and stuff like that have happened in the past. So let's go on to our final segment, which will reoccur time and time. When we originally created this, again, we were both worship leaders at the time, and the whole thing of it's called the Sunday set list stemmed from that we were going to, at some point in each episode, share with each other what's on the set list for the services that we were leading, and why we picked the song, or like what's the song that spoke to us, all that stuff. Sadly, now I don't have a set list to share here. But Matt, what's your upcoming Sunday set list? And maybe tell us why you picked some of the songs, or what is
Yeah.
there like a series that's going with
Yeah.
them, or what's going on?
So we are going into week 3 of a series called Seeking Justice, and we are going verse by verse through the book of Amos. So if you're not familiar with the book of Amos, that is one of the most doom and gloom books of the Bible, all about God's wrath and judgment over the nation of Israel. So it's been a little difficult.
I was going to say, how do you pick songs for that? Goodness.
Right. So, I try to be thematic, but I had to tell my pastor, if we do completely thematic services, then it's just going to be a bummer. So the front end of the service is more general, and the response is more specific. But it's been a good series. So we're starting out with "Glory to God Forever." And then going into a Big Daddy Weave song, "The Only Name," yours in parentheses, yours will be.
Oh, Big Daddy Weave! You're bringing
Oh,
Big
yeah.
Daddy
It's
Weave
fun.
into services. Goodness.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun song. And uh, when that ends, it's in B flat, and then the next hymn that I'm going into is in E flat. So it's not quite a big jump. I'm just walking up chords. We're going to end with "There will be one name that I proclaim, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." There's just something
Oh, that's nice.
about that name.
Oh,
Um,
that's nice. Can I come to your service this Sunday?
yeah. um, then bringing it, we have some other Ohio Ministries presentations this week, and then bringing it
Oh,
back,
now you lost me.
yeah, bringing it back into worship with "Christ is Enough," and which also references a hymn at the end. That's my theme this week: doing a contemporary song, then going into a hymn. And
Yeah,
then right after that, we're singing "Lord, I Need You." And you guessed it, we're going to end with a couple choruses of "I Need Thee Every Hour."
yeah, yep.
And then the response song, because the sermon this week is kind of hitting home of why are we doing what we're doing? Not just going through motions, being intentional in our worship. So there's a Cody Carnes song called "Nothing Else" that literally
Yeah.
said in one of the verses, "I'm sorry when I've just gone through the motions. I'm sorry when I just sang another song." Um, so, so yeah, that is my set list for this week. Next week we've got a doozy, which I'll be excited to talk about in our next episode. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love that Cody Carnes song of Nothing Else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm caught up in your presence. I just want to sit here at your feet. I'm caught
Yes.
up in this holy moment, man. That's one of those songs where it just makes you just take a second to breathe. I love those worship songs where, especially and you and I have done this in the past. And people would disagree with this, but we've started with songs like that before too, where there's all the distractions of everything in life, there's all the distractions, and to just take a second and breathe. And boy, that's a song that I feel like is a great closer, and also sometimes could be used as an opener
Oh, it
as
would
well
be a
too.
fantastic opener
Yeah,
because
so
the formula is fast to slow for some reason. So it's
yep,
fun to throw a reverse card in there every now and then.
absolutely, absolutely. So all right, well, so it's a doozy of an episode, but we've been excited for this episode. We've been excited to talk about, I'm always excited whenever I can talk about all the things I did wrong, because there's a very big list of things I learned from, um, and rehearsals is one of those. But man, the rehearsal, just it's the moment for your worship team to become a team. It's more, I think it's more of a moment for that than the Sunday service. I think it's the moment where you guys are able to to have your time of worship, because especially you start doing multiple services and stuff like that, and you know you're doing all that stuff, that can kind of be lost. But that time, that rehearsal, is the time where you have full attention on your team members and they have full attention on you, and it can be a great time.
Yes. And I think that's something we can ask our panel of experts that we bring in. You know, each guest we have, we can ask them, you know, what are their rehearsal techniques, and because I don't think there is it. You know, we can't get good enough.
Yeah.
At you know, creating good rehearsal techniques. So.
Yeah, that's great. All right, buddy. Well, until next Sunday.
All right.
Good luck this Sunday, and look forward to watching it on the live stream. So.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you next time on the Sunday Setlist.
All right. Bye, everybody.